A little bit about my journey is it really started with my father who experienced schizophrenia, and it created a pretty violent environment for me. Not all schizophrenia creates the same behaviors that my dad experienced and I experienced with him, but in our case, it was pretty wild. And what that did is it led me on a path of healing, and I think we're going to dive into that a little bit here. So.
Absolutely. So when you mentioned your father was going through that, I know for a lot of people, when they look at their families, it's like the safe space and it's supposed to be their haven away from the lot of the world. So when your father was going through this, what were some of your early experiences as he was beginning to demonstrate this type of behavior and actually go through it?
A lot of it I've actually repressed. Many of the stories that I have are from other people. And the ones that I can cobble together from my own memories are really hiding in my closet when the violence would start, or I had some really wonderful neighbors that would take me in and look after me until he calmed down. And quite honestly, we were lucky to have some really amazing police officers that would come in and break up some of the horrific things that were happening. So what it was like is just really unexpected. One moment he would be charismatic and the most amazing soul that I could have looked up to and loved and treasured and cherished, and then something would trigger him, whether it was maybe my shoes were lined up the wrong way, or um, the toothpaste cap wasn't on correctly, or I wasted something or didn't eat my dinner. And some of those things would just create this rage in him that was uncontrollable and pretty scary.
I could imagine that happening to a family member because I think sometimes we downplay the mental health side of our family member. And you and I look like we're relatively the same age, and I'm in my 30s, right? So if you're a little bit older, that's a compliment. If you're younger than me, I do apologize. Okay.
It's a big compliment. I'll say
It's a
that.
big okay, there you go. I'm already, first impressions, our second impressions, right? So one thing I want to say is that if I was going through it and I look at my parents' generation tend to downplay mental health quite a bit, right? My mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, very religious. So they used to be like this running joke, which wasn't so much a joke that if you were experiencing these things, it's because like you're possessed, right? Like the family was cursed. So it was more so not the responsibility, more the accountability of the family. It was somewhere else, it was something else. And the people who are going through it, who are on the other end, the receiving end, they were left in a situation where maybe they didn't know how to cope because they were necessarily taught that it's not their fault and they should just endure for the sake of enduring. For you, it sounds like that you're very young. And I know that you mentioned you repressed some of what you were going through. Now, as you're an adult and you have your own family, as you look back, how has that experience impacted you as an adult today?
Hmm. So many ways that I see it woven into my life. One is what I focus on. I've been on this lifelong journey of healing. And had I not experienced that trauma, I often think about what else I might be doing in this world. Would I be an artist instead? And listen, I could have probably healed through art as well. Like there's so many different ways to heal and grow. But that's the biggest one. Like I wanted to work in prisons when I was younger because I wanted to understand my father's mind better and his behavior better. I have read millions of books and listened to podcasts and gone on different retreats for my own journey. So that would be one way it's impacted me, is just how much time I spend reflecting on human behavior and spirituality and why why did he experience that and why were we brought together, and other things that I've seen. One of the best gifts is I'm pretty fearless. You mentioned that, often people have this home that's the safe haven. And because I didn't necessarily have that when I was younger, I was fortunate to have my mom break us out of that environment. And then I had this great stepfather who built a solid foundation later in life. But traveling actually felt safe, right? Because if I was afraid of my own home, I could go anywhere and I actually felt safer. So I've traveled the world solo, I travel with friends as well, but that's one of the gifts I really see as, coming from the situation. Some of the harder things that I work through on a daily basis are trust. I have um I've had a hard time, letting people into my life. I've been uber independent, so I don't put myself in any vulnerable situations. And listen, that's hard to be a partner with. When somebody wants to love you and do things for you, and I don't let them in. I've softened over the years, but there's still some edges there that I'm working on. And the latest discovery with trust is not necessarily putting the trust on somebody else, but more putting it on myself. And so trusting my intuition and trusting that I will know when I need to get out of a situation has really, really helped me. But it's taken me years to come to that revelation. And yeah, so many more, like I also find a lot of compassion. So, driving by homeless people, I will often stop and connect with them. Not always giving them money, sometimes giving them money, but more just to help them feel seen and heard, because they remind me of my dad in so many ways, and they're somebody else's family. So there's so many effects. I could probably talk for days, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in with someone, well, who really knows, right? Like you don't really know someone is going through something until maybe it may be diagnosed, and I was not in a position as a child to do so. But to your point, if I look back on my childhood and I look at my mother, my father, who I didn't grow up with, I'm like you in a lot of ways as an adult, where I travel and I do a lot of road trips, as I shared, and things of that nature. And one thing I found was one of the reasons why I did that is because when I was going to all these beautiful places, it was my way of creating memories that could maybe help replace the bad ones that I had. So I was like finding different types of love in all these different places. So when I went to Bali, when I went to Panama, when I drove through the States, I was in control of my environment, where maybe as a child I didn't have that much control and the memories were more dependent on everyone around me, versus when I go on these road trips or these vacations, it's my itinerary, it's the people I want to be around, and it's 100% within my control. Is that one of the benefits that you saw when you're doing these vacations, these trips, where you're creating all these memories, you're seeing all these beautiful places, and you are finding more about yourself when you go out there?
I love what you just shared. I had never thought about it that way. And that makes so much sense. I just kept filling my bucket with good things. And that you just gave me a huge aha. So I appreciate that. Yeah. The other reason I found traveling to be so beneficial for me too is one of the patterns I developed living in that environment was people pleasing. I was always trying to figure out what to do, how to be perfect, and how to make sure I didn't upset the apple cart. And what I realized after many years is I had lost my own voice because I had always been trying to make everybody else happy. And so traveling especially solo, was a way for me to find myself again, because I had to be the one to choose what restaurant we were going to. I didn't have to look for anybody's approval or try to make sure everybody else was happy. And so that was another beautiful part of traveling for me. And also a little bit of an escape mechanism. Some people use drugs and alcohol and social media and, you name it. And I have no judgments of anybody because we do numb ourselves out because things can be hard. Our emotions can be uncomfortable. And I just happen to choose one that looks really great on social media and is great dinner party stories, but it also is a way to just escape. And yeah. And now that I've healed a little bit more, I use it less as an escape mechanism and more as just adventure and discovery. But it's still there. If I'm having a rough go, something's happening, my instinct is, let me run away. And that's okay. Like it's okay to have coping mechanisms, I think. We're human.
Yeah, when I was able to, once I owned my first car and I got my license, I'm like, I am free, right? Like, this is, I think the only better type of freedom is having your own jet with like unlimited
That's next.
fuel, right? I know. Could you imagine where you're like, okay, I've had enough of my day today. Just hop in your jet and you're like in Thailand, for for example. And one thing that I really loved, and the first time I went on my solo trip, and I'm gonna kind of build this up a little bit. I went to, I forget what I was going through at the time, but I was like, Terrain, you need to learn how to travel by yourself and go enjoy things by yourself.
Hmm.
So the first thing I did, I love sushi. I went to a sushi restaurant. I was like, okay, Terrain, you're gonna go to the sushi restaurant by yourself. Let me tell you, Jessica, I put on my favorite shoes, my best pants, my best shirt, like I was going on a date, but I was going by myself. Okay. I sat at that restaurant. I went during, like, it was late afternoon. I didn't go for dinner. And to your point, right? Like, sometimes you think, okay, is everyone looking at me because, like, you're used to be a people pleaser, used to be all these things. And then I sat down there and I was like, Train, no one's looking at you. So I ordered the normal food I did. And then once I became comfortable with that, I went to a movie by myself. I went to
Hmm.
the museum by myself. I went to the event. And then I mentioned Panama earlier. I went to Panama by myself. Different part of the world, different country, different everything, right?
Wow.
And what I loved about that, Jessica, the first 2 days, you know what I did? Nothing on that beach. I worked on my tan. And to your point, right? Like, you didn't have to seek approval. You didn't have to maybe compromise because you're a people pleaser and you're trying to get out of that. You didn't do things you didn't want to do. I did everything I wanted to do. And the reason why I felt that was so liberating, to use that word, is that the old terrain wasn't able to do that because of everything that was going around me. But now I had the resources, now I had the time, but I think most importantly, I had the courage and the confidence. When you started doing these things outside of what you went through, what did you learn about yourself that you were maybe a little bit surprised to find out?
What a great question. And the first thing that comes forward is I was in this transformative time of my life and I lost the job that I thought I was going to be at for a while. I lost the guy I thought I was going to marry. I lost a bunch of money because the markets collapsed. And I really was like, oh, everybody else is the problem. And so I decided to go volunteer in the Philippines to go fill my soul. And I got all the way over there and, I packed my bags and got there and planes, trains, automobiles. And what I realized is I was still me and everything was because wherever I am, there I am, right? And whatever that saying is. And that was such an aha because I think that was probably the first time I realized what a victim mindset was versus more of an empowered place of taking ownership. And what's really cool about that realization was that I actually had something I could do with that, because if I was blaming everyone and everything around me, then I'm just stuck and I just have to deal with it. And that realization was like, no, wait, I actually have choices. Like I can do things. I didn't necessarily have the language and wisdom I do now. It took me a while to like, learn more from that first aha. But that was such a powerful realization. I don't know if that resonates for you in any way, or when you first realized you're not a victim and had choices.
It did. It did. And I always like to quote it as I went from a victim to a victor.
Okay, I love it.
Right. Right. Was that's what I had to learn. It was so comfortable blaming everything else and not willing to change. There was someone who she was going through a difficult situation, similar to what you and I were sharing today. And she stayed in it.
Mm,
And she stayed in it. And part of the problem that she started going through was she started to use it in every aspect of her life. So when she was in school, she says, well, I can't accomplish this in school because of this. When it came to her romantic relationships, same thing. I remember one day she shared with me, and I chuckle only because her response came off as like so arrogant in her victim mentality. Was when someone asked her, I guess someone she was interested in, they said, "Are you ever going to be able to move forward with your life because the people that have caused you harm, they've been able to move forward?" And she said, "No, because it's easier for me to be this way than it is for me to change."
mm,
And that was shocking because now you have someone who's admitting that they know what they're doing, and the impact. And you would think that if someone has damaged you in some way, you wouldn't want to continue to be imprisoned by that person, right? Especially when they've moved on. And it is hard to do, but I think what works for me, and maybe this worked for you, Jessica, is that once you can rediscover something that you love, it makes it a little bit easier. Would you agree?
Tell me more what's behind that statement, because I think I'm hearing you, but I want to make sure make sure I am.
Absolutely. So for me, I was able to find out that I enjoyed traveling because in my
Mhm.
20s, I didn't. So when I found out, I was like, wow, there's just like this escape feeling, as mentioned, like we're creating these positive memories. And then I realized was growing up, like going to the museum. My friends like, oh, that's what nerds do. That's what geeks do, right? Right. You'll never get a girl that way. But it was like, but I really, really enjoyed it. So I was able to break the shackles of maybe, I don't want to use the word shame, but maybe there's a sense of like embarrassment because you're like, hey, I kind of like these things, but I wasn't doing it previously because I was hurt. But now that I'm no longer hurt, what's really stopping me from doing these things? And it's like, okay, there's a little bit of embarrassment. So I stopped finding reasons not to rediscover something I love or to fall into love again. So I guess
Mm,
that's probably the best way I can explain it.
beautifully said. I like that. Yeah. And yeah, sending her some love too, and maybe someday she will see a different possibility too. Yeah.
I think so as well. So tell us about some of the work that you're doing. I visited your website. There's a lot of information there. I loved it, by the way. And you mentioned like you're on this mission now to break some of the stigmas around mental health. And one of the ways that you're doing that is not only these types of conversations, as well as there's a film that you're looking to produce as well. So speak to us about all the work that you're looking to do and of course, how much you love doing this.
Thank you. Yes, there is a film coming out, and it's going to be on my YouTube channel, Jessica Zemple, and it's called Cracked. It's a short documentary about my journey with my father. And how I found love and acceptance of him beyond the trauma. And my hope is to inspire hope and healing for anyone that, whether they're dealing with mental illness in their family, or maybe there's an estranged relationship, we all have our things. And so that's why I want to share my journey, is because I feel like I've learned so much, and if I can help others see possibility, and doesn't mean that they need to necessarily reconcile with that person and, like, have them specifically in their life, but I don't want people to be carrying the burdens around and the judgments and the shame, and I want people to let those go so they can be liberated. It was a word you used before. It's so true. It's like when we can, like, be lighter, we can be brighter, we can find more joy, peace, and listen, we're all gonna have grit in our life. But it helps us handle the grit in more loving ways. And so I'm super excited to bring the film out. I also just want to break stigmas around mental illness. I even hesitate saying those words. I don't know that illness really captures what's going on. I sometimes see that my father might have had a superpower, that he could experience things that are beyond my comprehension. And if he had a guide or a mentor or someone that could have taught him how to use these superpowers, maybe it would have been different. I don't know. And I just want to flip people's thinking around, rather than calling someone in my father's situation broken. And maybe there's nothing to fix, and maybe it's just we need to understand them better, and maybe there's something we can learn from them. So that's the goal with the film. And alongside that, I'm always doing different workshops of, teaching people about letting go of judgments, and living with more acceptance and forgiveness. And any way I can spread more love in the world, I get so much joy out of doing. Yeah.
Is that something that is difficult for some of the people you work with to let go some of the judgment and some of the yeah, let's use the word judgment because I think judgment can come from within as well as it come from without, so externally and internally. Is that difficult for some people to do?
Many people, I would say. And what I really acknowledge is the people that are courageous to look at the judgments, because that's where it starts. That's where the healing starts. And one day my dad asked me if I thought he was crazy, because everybody was calling him crazy and schizophrenic and all these things. And I looked at him and I said, "Dad, we all have voices in our heads." And he giggled, actually, like a little kid, because I think that was the first time he felt connected and not different, and appreciated that perspective, because I really do believe we all have these inner critics, and it's our work to really soften that critic and really work on those judgments. And whether it's self-worth, I think that falls for so many people, is like, I'm not worthy to have the abundance, or go for the relationship I want, or do my dream job, or whatever. And so, yeah, so I think discovering judgments and then letting them go, and that just takes rewiring. And what that looks like to me is, okay, if I'm judging myself as, hey, listen, I can't do a film because I've never done a film. I simply have to rewire that and say, somebody, everybody started at a certain point making films. Like, nobody was born a great filmmaker. And so um, when I flip things around like that, it it changes everything. It makes things more possible. And so, anyways, that's what I try to help people see too, is that the judgments aren't bad. And I never want people to judge themselves for being judgmental either, right? Like, let's not use judgments to make it even worse, but really just taking ownership and saying, okay, wow, that's damaging. And that is not supportive. No wonder I'm afraid to go for what I want or connect with other people. And so when we can eliminate our own personal judgments, and then the same is true for other people. Often I say how we're judging others is really a reflection of how we're judging ourselves. And so to me, if I'm judging somebody else, I really look within and say, what part of me have I not accepted and showered with love? And that's the work, and that's the healing process in my opinion.
The world and life can be so isolating, right? I look at your father's perspective, and the word crazy. I think there's so many people out there that know exactly how hurtful that word can be. Um, you end a friendship. Oh, I was friends with him for 10 years. He's become crazy now. Like it's such a dismissive word in the way that a lot of people use it. And I can see your father coming to and trying to maybe grasp with the changes that he's experiencing in his life and just asking simply, am I crazy? Maybe he felt that way. Maybe he was told that way, right? And the reassurance, which um I think is such a underappreciated, undervalued tool just to reassure someone, yes, father, you're not crazy. You're going to be all right. Or Jessica, you're going through something. You're going to be okay. Like I see a very good future. I think we forget how powerful reassurance can be. And when you mention the judgment, that some people find it difficult to work through, is reassurance a part of that process to help them work through it? And if it is, how accepting are they of the reassurance? Because sometimes it can be hard to accept it when we know that we've been through so much.
Reassurance, I think, is supportive, but I do believe it has to be the individual that comes to that place. So I could have a million people around me reassuring me that I am courageous or I am worthy or you name it. But until I believe it myself, the reassurance is it's not the necessarily the solution in my opinion, but I do believe it's supportive. I believe it helps people get there. But I think you clued in on something very important. Sometimes too, the reassurance can actually feel bad. So if I feel unworthy and somebody tells me that I am worthy, or maybe they give me a promotion because they think I'm worthy, but I don't think I'm worthy, I might actually feel worse because of that situation. They did nothing wrong. They're just trying to recognize me and honor me. But because I'm feeling small and it doesn't work for me at that time, it can actually have a strangely like negative effect, which is wild. So I'm always careful with my words. An easy example is if a child comes home with grades and they've got all A's, it's easy to say, way to go. But if that child doesn't feel like they worked hard or, it didn't feel like it actually represented what what their effort was or what they thought it should be, they might feel it take it as a negative thing. And so I like to just get curious instead of placing a congratulations on them. So I want to say, how do you feel about all the A's? Or how do you feel about this C that you got? And tell me more. Like, so rather than um, telling them that they're perfect, because that's a lot of pressure, um, I had a friend once do that. I said, "Oh, you're such a light." And she's like, "Please be sure to know that I have dark days too, because I don't want that pressure of always being a light." And I thought that was just so wise. And so just allowing people to be human.
I love that, the power of the open-ended question. How do you feel, right? About that. And that's a fantastic way because you can have someone to your point, right? Like they've accomplished something, but they don't necessarily feel good. Um, have you been in a situation where, because I like that, have you been in a situation where someone has accomplished something that on the outside looks really good, but then you're like, okay, I don't think this person is as celebratory as maybe everyone else is. So now you gotta maybe probe a little bit more and find out, okay, why are they feeling the way they're feeling where everyone on the outside is so enthusiastic for them?
Absolutely. I've seen it a few times that I'm aware of, and it's probably been around me more often than I'm even aware of too. And so I've now that I've grown to that understanding, I'm more careful with my words and um acknowledgments. But yes, it's wild. I and how it can show up if it's a successful business person and or maybe a financially successful, because success comes in so many different flavors. Um but if they don't feel, maybe they stepped on people to get there, right? Maybe they did something behind their partner's back that they, like, who knows what's really happening. And so curiosity is such an important part of life and allows us to connect more deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing like the surface, right? Like if we someone comes to me and they say that, oh, I was able to overcome this trauma. Let's say they're in a relationship and their partner cheated on them, but they're able to overcome it and the relationship continues. And you go to them, you're like, oh, good job. You're so strong in accepting that. But we don't know the battles that they had to fight within themselves to get there. We don't know, okay, what's still impacted? Is their confidence, their trust? If I were to put myself in a situation where something like that happened to me, I think part of my healing would be, why wasn't I sufficient enough for this person not to do that?
Hmm.
And then two would be, how is that going to make me feel if I continue this? Because can I be the same terrain before this happened, and can the relationship be the same?
Mhm.
Right. So when you speak to some of the people that you speak to regarding their trauma, I can understand that. I'm guessing for the most part, before the trauma, they're one person. As they work through it, they're one person. As they work, and they on the other end, they're another person. Is there three different types of ways to acknowledge and encourage those people? Or is it more so, okay, it's the same way each time, just at different points in those times?
If I'm hearing your question in the right way, of like how does the healing occur from the trauma, i I feel like there's so many different ways for people. So some people have a strong faith, and whether that's through religion or spirituality, and they lean on that. Some others may have a strong community, and others may go within and do a lot of self-reflection. So if I'm working with somebody on that, what I try to do is untangle the grit from their identity. So often we think we are the trauma. And so um and that's hard, because if you're entangled with the trauma or the experience that happened to you, you're never going to feel whole and complete, because that's just not representative of who you are. So you've got to put the trauma aside and say, I'm still Jessica. I grew up in a crazy wild environment, but that doesn't define me. It's just part of my story. And then I get to choose what part I want that story to play in my life. I can either use it as a weight to hold me back, or I can use it to propel me forward. And some days I do both. I can fall into the victim every once in a while, but it's less and less frequent now. But we have that choice. And so if I can encourage people just to think, okay, you are not your trauma, whatever you went through that was so bad and hard um and you know, just inappropriate in a lot of ways, but you're so much more than what's happened to you.
I am Jessica versus I am the trauma.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I saw someone on social media. She was going through, she mentioned she went through trauma and it was it was becoming difficult for her because to your point, some people don't want to be defined by it, but she was becoming defined by it because she was getting attention, likes, and
Mm.
views. I sometimes find that difficult for those who are part of the healing process is because as you're healing, sometimes the healing could be isolating, right? Like you could be by yourself dealing one on one with you. But then if you embrace it and let it define you and you post it online, you have all these people from all these different parts of the world. And there was one situation I spoke to someone on my show and the trap that she fell into, and maybe sometimes we think this is more of a woman thing, but I think it's more of a low confidence thing, was the tension she started to get. She started to, what's the word I'm looking for? She started to embrace it and encourage it. And it led her into less than noble situations. So I find this a bit difficult for some people because they're already vulnerable enough, right? But if they're getting this type of attention and its magnitude across the board, I think sometimes people can get lost in the attention. So as you mentioned, part of the healing process, what are your thoughts on some people who may get lost in being defined by the trauma because there's so many people giving them what seems to be one of the most valuable things in the world, and that's attention and to a degree time.
You've said so many powerful and wise things in what you just shared. And I personally went through that because I didn't feel worthy. I made myself special by being the girl without a dad. I don't have a dad, he's not in my life. And so, did it get me attention? Maybe. Did it get me sympathy? Probably you know, a lot of that, but it wasn't helping me, right? The sympathy is almost like a victim. It's like, oh, poor you, you're the girl without a dad. But I didn't know that at the time. And so when I did reconnect with my dad, I had a disruption in what I thought was my identity because I was the girl without a dad a day before. And now I had a dad back in my life. And I was like, oh my God, who am I now? Like, now I'm not special, is what I thought at first. It wasn't that conscious. It was more reactionary at the time because I just didn't have the wisdom and the knowledge I do now. But it was really disruptive. I was like, who am I? And that's been a journey to realize like and that's really why I share this, is that we're so much more than the grit, is because I walked that path. It was what I thought made me special and what I thought made me unique. And then I realized I just am because I was born, and so are you. And so is everybody watching this. Like everybody is special. I mean, the fact that we are here being humans is pretty wild. Like, we don't even have to do anything beyond that to be special. Like, we're here. And so to recognize that attention is coming from a place that actually isn't so supportive is going to be a powerful insight for them when they're ready. And the shift will be a beautiful one, but maybe not easy, right? Because it may change the amount of attention they get, but maybe the one person that's cheering them on from an authentic place is better than the, millions that are cheering them on from a place of sympathy or um sadness. So I know that intimately. I never had attention at that scale that it sounds like you're talking about, but it was hard. It was disruptive, but now that I'm on the other side, and it's it's so good. So if any of you out there know what we're talking about, go for it, because it's so freeing to realize that you're you're so much more than your story.
Yeah, I think once people realize the other side and they experience the other side, they
Yeah.
begin to remember the like, wow, okay, this is life again, right? It's because it's so easy to forget how life was before the pain, right? Especially if the pain is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. And it's like, wow, I don't even remember who I was. It's like being in a bad marriage, right? You're like, is this me? Am I really this person? Because you're compromised in so many different ways, and you're trying to rediscover and re-find your yourself. Were there points in your life where you felt lost and you're looking around and you're like, I don't know if I will ever get out of this darkness?
I just went through one in recent years, and what it looked like is I was in a partnership for a number of years, and they were diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer, very curable. And I spent a year by their side caring for them. And fortunately, they healed. And at the end of it, we parted ways. And it was very explosive in a way that we had become so close because of the cancer. And when we went our separate ways, I just felt lost. Part of it was because I had such great purpose for an entire year. Like my sole focus was, let's make sure that they have the best healing environment possible. I was in the hospital and doctors' offices all the time, and to have a singular thing to focus on has a power to it, especially when you're talking about somebody's life. And it felt so meaningful, and as hard as it was so rewarding. And so when that came to an end, the first transition was when he got done with his treatment. Both of us felt a little lost when we didn't have all the doctors around us, so that was interesting because we had such a support team. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, you're like, you have to go on your own. You have to fly. You got to get out of the nest. And, both of us were adults, and we're like, what? No, we just want to keep seeing you and know that he's safe. And then for us to part ways just because it was the right time for us to do that. Like, there was some darkness there and in feeling lost. And I really had to spend some time with myself to again reconnect, because I had made him such a priority. And I did it in a conscious way. So it wasn't in a negative way, but it still was a lot. And so I went on a road trip, of course, and I went river rafting where I could just totally disconnect from the entire world and be in nature and be surrounded by other amazing souls. And the river is always, nature in general is always so healing for me. And so yeah, and then I had to recover from caregiving too. It depleted me in a lot of ways energetically. And so yeah, so I it's wild for me to be living and teaching these concepts all the time and still have to be using them in such big ways. It felt, I mean, that was an important time. And I think that's really where the film came from, because it felt big enough to it felt meaningful enough, as caring for him did. And so I don't know, does that resonate for you? Have you gone through one of those transitions recently too?
I have. Mine was with my circle of friends. I was trying to understand the type of person that I was becoming because what I wanted to do is I wanted to let everyone know that I was becoming a different version of myself. And the aha moment was me sitting down and thinking, because I like to talk to myself in a way, but in my mind, right? So what I would do is I'll have conversations. It's like it's me and a couple of other people that I'll weigh my options. And I said, okay, Train, this is the person you are today. This is where you want your life to go. And this is the type of person you're going to be. Are there going to be the same amount of people and the same group of people around you? And the answer was no. So
Mm.
I had to have some very frank conversation within myself. And then eventually, when I had those conversations with them, I had to let them know. But it's interesting that you mentioned that you went on a road trip because life has so much complexities to it. But the solution, and ladies and gentlemen, I say this every time and I will live and die by this. You will be surprised how simple the solution is, even for the most complex problems. Like sometimes it's literally you going on a trip, doing something you love. And then when you come back, you're like, wow, that is exactly what I needed. Sometimes it's just going to your favorite restaurant and having a meal with your friends. Sometimes it's just sitting there with a good book and you're like, okay, I can handle this. It's basically you using what you love to reset your mind, body, and soul so you can best prepare yourself. So, to answer your question, Jessica, absolutely. I went through that. And between you and I swear I probably go through it every 3 months.
Yeah. That's honest, right? Like, and that's where it's so important for us to be honest with each other. So those that are going through those things don't feel like there's something wrong with them or that they're broken or yes, so I really love that. I mean, that you're doing this work so people uh, can feel whole and be human in all ways.
Yeah, we all need assistance. I think. Like I work with women. I work with women who've been abused, and they're looking for guidance. And as I give them guidance, I need guidance, and you're paying it forward, right? It's like I think it's like you have a cup. Like they say you fill up your cup and then you can pour into other people's. That's the way I look at it. But it's like this chain. So like you and I came into contact, so we're pouring into each other's cup. Then when you go on your way, go on mine, we can pour a little bit more on someone else, and then they go on their way. So you have this chain reaction. I think essentially that's why we're here is to help as many people as possible because it doesn't matter where you're from, your religious background, the language you speak, we all can use some type of help. And I think sometimes we think we're burdening people by telling them about our problems, saying that, hey, you know what? Can I speak to you for a moment? But I don't want to overstep. That's okay. It's okay to help people and it's okay to ask. Is that a commonality that maybe you find in your experiences where asking is probably a difficult step for those involved?
100%, myself included. I've had to really work on that. And the one thing that I find that helps a lot of people that are learning how to ask for help is reminding them how good they feel when they're helping somebody else. And so when they think about that, they're like, oh, of course, I love helping people. So why wouldn't somebody want to help me? And so that that I find prompts a lot of people to have this aha and be like, oh, maybe that's not so bad. Maybe I'm not a burden. And also, we have to trust other people have boundaries. And if they can't help us, they can say that. And if they're not good at boundaries, then they have some work to do, but that's on them, not on you for asking for help, right? So, um, but a lot of people feel good helping each other. I mean, I think we're all here in service to each other and sharing whatever our gifts are. And what a privilege if somebody, if we're prompting that in somebody. So, but it's more common than I that people are afraid to ask for help. And that idea of being a burden is so big and prevalent.
So as we close, Jessica, speak to my audience about helping them set up healthy boundaries and not being afraid to ask for help, and more importantly, I guess, asking for the type of help that they need.
So boundaries are a practice, and sometimes it's easier to start somewhere that feels less scary. And maybe it's with a friend that you do trust, and you can practice the boundaries with them. I actually have a worksheet on boundaries, so if anybody wants it, just email me at jessica@lifeshucker.com, or you can find it on my YouTube. I have a boundaries video that can point you there, because it is so important. Um, and the better we get at boundaries, you know, the better we're going to feel. And here's the irony train with boundaries. It's like we only need them in places where people aren't respecting our boundaries. And so inherently it's hard to do boundaries, because it's generally with somebody that is overstepping a line, whether intentionally or not. And everybody's got different lines. So I don't think anybody's bad or wrong for crossing boundaries. That's why we've got to teach people how we want to be treated. And that's what boundaries are. And what's really beautiful too is I have found I used to get really upset when other people had boundaries because I didn't have any. And so now I respect other people's boundaries as well. It's like, oh, thank you for having that clear engagement rule kind of guideline for me to work with you. I respect it so much. And um, yeah, so boundaries are really, really critical. And start somewhere that it doesn't feel scary, and build up the courage. And then you've got to reinforce them. Once you establish the boundaries, you've got to stay with it and speak up for yourself. And yeah. So I also like having people find people in their life that are good at boundaries. And that way you have a model and say, oh, I see how this person does it. Maybe it's your aunt or your boss or colleague or something like that. And yeah, so looking for models so we can learn from other people is always helpful. And then asking for help, I think you asked about how people can work on that. I love telling people to practice at a coffee shop. And again, it's starting small, starting somewhere that isn't like threatening. So ask for the craziest coffee that you can think of, even if it's not what you want, but put yourself out there and notice if it makes you nervous, if your stomach's upset, and then keep doing it. And the more comfortable you get at asking for help or asking for what you want, the easier it will get. And part of that is dealing with rejection too, and not taking rejection personally. Rejection's just a no, right? It's just a filter. I submitted my film to many film festivals and I got rejected from all of them, but it doesn't mean the film's bad. It just means it wasn't a right fit for that film festival. And so that's really what I've flipped rejection into being, is more of a filter to what's in greatest alignment to my life. And so hopefully that helps your community in maybe taking some new steps in their own lives. But